Welcome back to the English with Kim YouTube channel, where you'll learn what to say, how to say it, and why it matters. I'm Kim, and I'm your guide to the essential communication skills you need to sound more natural in English. Welcome to this live stream to celebrate almost reaching 10,000 subscribers on this YouTube channel. I'm so thankful to all of you guys for subscribing to my channel, for watching my videos, for leaving thoughtful comments, and for giving me great ideas for future videos. So I have not done a live stream on this channel in about 6 months. It's been quite a while, so I hope this is a great chance for us to reconnect, give you an opportunity to ask your questions, hopefully get some answers. And of course, if I can't answer your question in this particular live stream, I will definitely keep it in mind for a future video. A lot of my videos are inspired by comments that you have and questions that you ask in these live streams and also inside the other videos. So please be sure to say hello if you are watching in the live stream, and if not, be sure to comment, share that you have where you're from, share a little bit of your story, share why you want to sound more natural and speak a little more confidently, more clearly, more effectively, everything that we talk about on this YouTube channel. So this is going to be a live Q&A session, which means you can ask your questions in the chat and let me know what you're thinking about. And it's basically an ask me anything about accent and communication skills. So any questions that you have about the topics that we often cover on the channel, something that you feel like I'm not quite answering for you and you'd like a little more clarity that will help you speak a little more confidently and be able to achieve your goals when speaking English. So be sure to leave your comments. I've prepared a few questions that people have asked me frequently for people who may be newer to my channel, who may not know the answer to these questions, and just some things I feel like we should talk about. So I hope this inspires you to think about your own questions and ask them in this live Q&A. So let's take a look at these slides, and just so I can answer the questions that I get asked all the time. So the first question I get asked all the time that I think it's important to talk about is, where are you from? From time to time, I get this question, and I think it's a really intelligent question to ask because obviously I'm American. I am from the New England area, which for those of you may be more familiar with the city of Boston. I've lived in the city of Boston, but I'm actually from New England. So that's the greater region around the city of Boston. I'm from the state of New Hampshire. So this is a great question to ask if you are trying to understand the particular regional accent that you may hear. For the most part, I would say I speak with the general American accent. I don't have a Boston accent, but you will hear in some of my vowel sounds, perhaps some of the language I use and other things like that, you may hear more of a regional tinge is the word I was looking for. One of the words that I say that I can really hear the kind of regional New England accent is when I say the word can. It's very nasally, and so it's a sound that is not necessarily, you might not hear someone from California pronounce that vowel sound in quite the same way. But it is an important thing as you continue to advance and you continue to improve your English to think about what accent are you developing from the people whose resources you're using. Is it an accent you want to imitate, or is it just helpful for you to understand people that you interact with, whether that's your coworkers or your colleagues, your friends? There are a lot of different accents, and not everyone in the United States necessarily has a strong regional accent, but some people do. And so it's important to kind of be able to decipher that. Obviously, there's many other versions of English. You may hear different accents of British English, Australian English, New Zealand English, South African English. The list goes on and on, but it's helpful to kind of understand where someone's from so that if you notice things that are different in my speech as opposed to somebody else you're listening to, you can determine where they're from. So it's just a common question I get asked all the time. I think people are trying to understand, what regional accent they're developing from my resources. But I would say, because I'm from the New England area, I'm from the Boston area, but I used to live in New York, I lived in California, I've lived in other places. It influences my accent because I kind of have lost the most obvious markers. I often tell the story that my brother, he actually lives in North Carolina. He lives in the South. And my brother also has a general American accent because I think he also lived in Washington, D.C. and Virginia and North Carolina. So you kind of start losing some of the regional markers unless you're really surrounded by people with that particular accent. So you may hear a couple of things that are more Bostonian or more New England, but for the most part, you probably won't hear that much difference. So that's a common question I get all the time. Another common question that I would like to answer for you guys right now is, how long have you been teaching? So it's kind of a funny thing. I feel like the number 10 is really big for me right now because I have been teaching for 10 years. I started teaching English in I believe it's November of 2008. So I just finished 10 years of teaching. I have taught in so many different environments. And this is actually important for you guys to understand. You may notice that my teaching philosophy is a little bit different. And that's because the majority of my teaching has been in the United States, working with non-native speakers who live and work or live and go to school here. So my philosophy is helping people who need to hear natural speech, which is why I speak at a natural speed, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So I've been teaching since 2008, and I've had the opportunity to teach in California, in Rhode Island, in Boston, and I've also taught in Chile and in Peru. So I've spent a few years working with English teachers, whether they're non-native English teachers or Americans who want to learn how to teach English living abroad. So I've done a lot of different things. I've worked in nonprofits. I've worked in language institutes. I've worked one-on-one. I have my own teaching business right now, which is English with Kim. So it's been a very interesting journey teaching English for 10 years. And that's why it's kind of funny that this is like the 10 years celebration, a few months delayed, as well as, 10,000 subscribers, hopefully in the next couple of days. So yeah, and that's kind of a funny thing. I decided I have to do this live stream today because I always emphasize getting close enough with your accent. You don't have to sound just like a native speaker, but you want to get close enough, in order to communicate more effectively. So I figured I can't, I may not have quite hit 10,000 subscribers yet, but we're close enough, and that's why we're doing the live stream. Okay, so I'm going to take a moment and look at you guys in the chat have come in. Oh my goodness, there's people I haven't seen in so long. Yes, Areta, it's nice to see you. Yes, happy Women's Day. It's funny, guys. Women's Day is not a big thing in the United States, and I only really learned about it when I lived in Argentina many, many, many years ago. So it's funny because we don't really celebrate it, but I will appreciate the celebration from you guys. Okay, Gerardo, I enjoy your channel. I find it helpful and educational. Yay! Thanks in advance. Yes, I hope this is helpful, Mohammed. Hello. I don't know who DG is, but thank you. Hi, Ann. Nice to see you. Long time long. Nice to see you as well. I can understand you very well. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment, why other native speakers you can't. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. Good to see you back on YouTube again. It's been so long since you uploaded your last video. It's been 5 weeks. It's because I recorded a lot of videos in November and I haven't made any more since then. So I'm going to record next week, hopefully. So there will be new videos. Don't worry. Is registration still available? It should go first. It depends on whether you're asking a question or telling a statement. Hello, Abdir Sheed. Hello, Mohammed. May you talk about how Americans speak on a regular beat? Yes, we can totally talk about that and ways to practice. Let's talk about that for sure. Nelson, thank you. And what's the main nationality among your students, and what's the main difficulty speaking English in terms of accent? That's a really good question. And hi, Tommy. And Klaus says, it's good to see you again. Happy Women's Day. What do you recommend to get good pronunciation? Thank you. Okay, so I will definitely answer some of those questions. I want to go through the ones because you guys are already asking questions I had planned, and then we'll keep going. Okay, so and just keep asking your questions as I go through and talk, because this is a live video. And actually, before I continue on with the slides, I used to do a lot more live videos. In fact, there's a lot of them that are not available to be viewed on my channel publicly, but if you go to the playlist, you can watch them, like the Conversations with Kim series. And the thing that's nice about live videos, that I miss doing them, but there's reasons for both things. Live videos are nice because you can see that as a native speaker and an educator, I make mistakes. I sometimes lose my train of thought. I sometimes speak too quickly. I sometimes have to rephrase my idea. I'm not always going to say things perfectly, and neither should you. You shouldn't expect to say things perfectly. See, it just happens naturally. So that's why I like doing these live videos, because you get a chance to see me more more how I would interact with a friend, although obviously I don't usually speak into a camera when I'm talking to a friend, but you get to hear the more natural speed I speak with, the more natural tone, because a lot of times with the videos that are recorded and edited, they don't have the same feeling because they're planned in advance. They're designed to be more concise, to be 10 minutes or so, because that's the style people like on YouTube. But I really do encourage you, if you have the time, try to watch a variety of videos. Try to watch ones where people are more chatty. I watch a lot of YouTube videos in other industries, and people ramble, they say funny things, they make mistakes. There's something about the English industry that I think that people want us to be much more clear and concise and to the point. And so sometimes I stopped doing as many live videos because I felt like people were complaining about the way the long videos were. So I don't know. So this is just your opportunity to see like me coming up with ideas as I'm talking. And you'll see I'll still refer back to the same ideas I'll talk about, but maybe I'll approach it from a different angle, or I'll say it in a different way that will help you understand a little better. So that's just something to understand. Live videos are long, but they can teach you different aspects of the language. It's important to understand how to present ideas in a very formal way, like if you were giving a presentation, delivering a PowerPoint, leading a meeting, but you're also going to have more casual interactions. So try to take in that kind of input, as I would call it, in order to really understand how people speak. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of the questions I pre-prepared, and then I will get to your questions. Okay, do you speak any other languages? Okay, this is a good question. I do mention this at the bottom of all of my videos, but I do speak other languages, and this is also important. If you're learning from people who are teaching English, not every English teacher is going to speak another language, but the best ones will, and I think almost everyone I know does speak another language because we have the experience. We may not know what it's like to learn English because we grew up speaking English, but we do understand learning another language. So I speak Spanish fluently. I started learning Spanish when I was in high school. So like many of you, I did not have the opportunity to start learning a language when I was very young. I'm from a small town originally. We didn't have a language program until I went to a regional high school, so people who went from all different small towns to this main school. So I started learning Spanish in high school. I am from an area that at the time I was growing up did not have a lot of native Spanish speakers. So all of my teachers were American. And most of them had learned Spanish in Spain. So that really influenced my Spanish fluency journey because I was learning from non-native speakers, like many people do. And so I was learning Spanish from non-native speakers who spoke with the Spain accent, although which one I don't know, maybe Madrid, maybe Barcelona, I'm not sure. And then it was only when I went to college and I started taking Spanish classes in college that I had teachers from Cuba, from Colombia, from oh my goodness, Mexico. I think I also had a lot of native English teachers who were non-native Spanish speakers. So what I had to do in order to become fluent was to move to Argentina for a year when I was in college. I did a study abroad like many Americans do for 1 year, and I did really, really work hard in order to become fluent in Spanish. It was not easy for me. Some people, languages come naturally to them, but I couldn't speak when I arrived in Argentina. It took me oh my goodness. Well, I basically stopped speaking English with my American friends and we only spoke Spanish. So I was able to kind of get to the point where I started thinking in Spanish. And that's why my one video on this topic of fluency is the one about start thinking in English. And that is exactly what I did to start thinking in Spanish. So it has been quite a journey that's been over 15 years. Oh my goodness. Yeah, over 15 years, let's just use that number, since I lived in Argentina. And since then, I've traveled back to South America, and I've lived I spent about 3.5 years in South America in the last 5 or 6 years, so back and forth with the US, and I had to relearn fluency once I left Argentina, went back to my life, started working. So it is a journey. The fluency is not like you become fluent and that's it. You are done forever. It takes a lot of time, and you'll lose your fluency, it'll come back. You'll become fluent in one area, and you'll still need to focus, like you'll need to learn professional language. You might do better with conversational language. So I don't know. It's just important to understand that I understand that the journey it's not a direct path as much as we wish it were. It is a journey. And if the more you can do to enjoy the journey of learning a language, the better luck you're going to have enjoying learning English. You have to find a way to enjoy it, or it's just not going to be fun. Even now, it's been quite. I moved back from Chile in Peru. It's a long story. Those of you who've been a member of my channel for a while have heard this story. But I lived in Chile, and then I spent a few months in Peru before coming back to the U.S. in 2016. So it has been quite a few years since I spoke Spanish. So I would be curious how fluent I am right now. So it's just an interesting thing. And then I also have spent time learning Portuguese. I learned Portuguese when I attended grad school, and I used to speak a lot more Portuguese with friends I had in the Boston area, and but I was never fluent in Portuguese. I spoke kind of a hybrid of Portuguese and Spanish, and I never learned enough Portuguese to speak fluently. So I can read Portuguese. I can also read other Romance languages just from my experience with Spanish. But I probably wouldn't be able to have a conversation in Portuguese these days. So don't try. I try though. Sometimes people comment in Portuguese and I try to respond to you. So anyway, it's just helpful to know that I do have the experience learning a language, and it hasn't been as perfect a journey as it would like it to be. I think that the reason I mention this, and I think it's important as a Q&A, is that I think my experience with this language learning journey influences why I teach what I teach in English to you guys. It's because I really want to help people who need English to improve their lives, and who sounding more natural, sounding more like a native speaker, communicating effectively will help you move forward with your goals. And that's because it was hard for me. And I still have an accent when I speak Spanish. I don't know that that will ever change. I might be beyond the point of really being able to do too much to change it. And so I know that why you want to sound natural, why it's not that you want to lose your accent entirely or sound just like a native speaker, but you just kind of don't want it to be a focus of the conversation. And it's just to kind of have the interactions you would have in your native language and feel intelligent, feel confident, feel like you can express yourself. So just sharing a little bit of my journey with you guys here. Okay, so let's look at a couple more questions, and then I'll go to you guys in the live chat. And this is such a good question for right now. Is this your normal speaking speed? And I mention this because today I actually received, in the last 24 hours, these two comments back to back, which means right next to each other. So one person said that they liked that I don't speak like a robot so that they can understand me. Instead, I speak as a native speaker, which is better because we're listening to natural speech. And another person said, oh, interesting video, but you talk too fast. And those of you who have been members of my channel for a longer time, you have definitely heard that you've definitely heard me talk a lot about how lost my train of thought, of course. So you've heard me talk a lot about how people comment about my speaking speed. And the thing is, like I mentioned at the beginning, that when we're speaking at a normal, natural speed in everyday speech, a lot of times it's when you're feeling more enthusiastic, you're excited about a topic, you're looking forward to talk about something. So like I said, talking about this within live videos it's important for you to hear somebody speaking naturally in a live video, because this is how I would interact. I'm obviously considering that my audience is non-native speakers and I'm trying to speak more clearly. I'll repeat ideas a few times. If I think I used language that is a little more difficult, I'll try to simplify things, try to make it a little bit easier. And so basically, sorry, just looking at the live chat and getting a little bit distracted. That's why I try not to do two things at the same time. Okay, so yes, this is my normal speaking speed, but you have to understand that I am an educator, so I'm used to speaking clearly. Sometimes people think that the way that I speak, because I use a lot of clear stress in the way I speak, for a native speaker, they may think it's annoying. It is the way I speak. I've been teaching for 10 years. It's natural for me to speak in this way, to speak clearly, to emphasize words, to be really emphatic when I'm speaking. So I do speak naturally. I do think it's important to speak at a natural speed. There's a lot of discussions within the online teaching community that a lot of times there's a lot of video resources out there where people speak exceptionally slow. They speak really emphasizing every single word, slowing down, and that is not how native speakers talk. So the problem is, if you're used to only hearing that style of speech, when you do interact with a native speaker, you're going to have trouble understanding that there's this awkward, this is awkward moment where you've been listening to native speakers, but you have trouble actually understanding them because you've been listening to teachers who are speaking with what we call the teacher voice. So I made the decision when I started my business, and also when I started teaching for the most part, that I was going to speak at a natural speed. Now, like I said, I've been working primarily with people living in the US. And so a lot of times the comments are, oh my goodness, Kim speaks so fast and it's really scary for me when I first get started. But then I understand native speakers more quickly because I'm used to listening to the way that Kim speaks. And that's the philosophy I have on my channel, is if I'm going to talk about sounding natural, I have to speak naturally. I have to speak at a normal speed. And that's just really important for you to be able to understand, is that, for some people, this may be too fast for them, but I can't please everybody with my YouTube channel. I focus on more advanced learners, fluent non-native speakers who are trying to improve their accent. It's impossible for us to help everybody with every single circumstance. There's a big difference between learning English abroad and learning English because you live or you work in the United States or Canada or another English-speaking country. There's different challenges. Doesn't mean one's better or one's worse, but it's impossible to make everybody happy. So yes, you can tell this is my normal speaking speed. When I'm really excited and I'm with friends and I feel relaxed, I probably speak quicker. There are Americans who speak slower than me, and there are Americans who speak faster than me. So you'll hear just about anything. So yeah, that's just a question I get all the time and that I wanted to talk about. And then the last question that we will mention today is this one. Is it possible to sound like a native speaker? This was such a good question, which is it really possible to learn how to speak English 100% like a native? Sometimes I ask myself if it's really possible to achieve that goal. Have you known someone who speaks English completely like a native English speaker? Such an interesting question. So basically, I have met a few people who have almost a native accent. I met a few people over the years, and it really isn't basically based on languages or things like that. It doesn't have to do with their language. There's probably a lot of reasons. The thing I want you to understand is, first, you have to ask yourself, why do you want to sound just like a native speaker? In fact, a lot of times I feel like people say, I want to sound just like a native speaker. I want to completely eliminate my accent. I want to have no trace of the fact that I'm a non-native speaker. And there may be reasons why someone wants to do that. But I would say that that kind of goal is possible. It's totally possible if you're willing to commit to it 100% and work your tail off. It requires a lot of work every single day in order to completely eliminate your accent. So usually when I hear that kind of comment, I try to tell people, do you really need to completely eliminate your accent, or do you just need to speak more clearly? My goal for my clients when I work one-on-one is usually not complete accent elimination, because I just feel like that requires retraining the entire way that your mouth is used to moving, and that is quite challenging. Mine is to speak more clearly and be more easily understood, and like I said earlier, to get close enough, to be able to get close enough in order to just kind of pass as a native speaker. One of my clients said something really smart a couple years ago, where she said the reason she really appreciated working on her stress and intonation, which is what I teach a lot on this channel, is that when you first meet a native speaker and you're using correct stress and intonation, you're going to enter the conversation and they're not going to immediately hear you're a non-native speaker. However, as you continue to talk, they're going to figure it out. If you've seen my video on how to handle comments about your accent, you are able to basically detect that somebody's a non-native speaker listening to speech played backwards. They've done studies on this. That means reversing the way the speech is. There are things that you're going to hear. If somebody sounds almost like a native speaker, I'm going to probably hear that stress is off on something strange. They're going to drop a preposition or something. They're going to use the wrong preposition. They're going to use the way the preposition combination works in their native language. They're going to use a particular phrase that we don't use in this region, or that's more from British English. There's going to be some clue that's going to somehow appear and tell me that they're not a native speaker, or they're not a native speaker from the US. For example, I've been watching the TV series, for those of you who are familiar, that's called Outlander. And Outlander, most of it takes place in Scotland. And there's an actress who's actually British. She's playing an American. And I'm listening to her, and she sounds sort of American. Like, she has a pretty good American accent as a British actress, but she says the word anything in a way that I can hear American would not say the word anything. And people from different regions can just pick up, there's something different about your speech. I can hear when someone's from California and they're not from the Boston area. Well, the Boston area is an obvious one, but I can hear Californian accent. So anyway, yes, you can sound just like a native speaker. It requires a lot of work. It also may depend on what your history is when you started learning English. People who start learning any language when they're very, very, very young have an easier time getting close to a near native speaker. Most of my friends who have moved to the US before they turned about 14 sound just like a native speaker, even though English may not have been their first language. But then there will be that little thing that will tell you, oh, they're not a native speaker. And it doesn't really matter, because the point of sounding like a native speaker is, in my opinion, just to try to have your accent not be a huge distraction. So I do think it's possible. I don't think it is the best goal for most people, just based on how much time you have in your life or how much you're willing to commit to that. I do think there's things you can do to speak more confidently, to sound better, to improve the quality of your speech, to make sure that your message is being delivered very well, to speak with the right emotions, through intonation, to show that you're culturally, adept inside American culture, if that's your target culture. So I do think it's possible, but I do think it is highly unusual and not the best way to spend your energy for most people. But we can discuss that in the comments. So those are the questions I had today that I had pre-prepared. So we're going to go back to the chat and see what you guys were saying. Okay, so let's go all the way back here to the questions at the beginning. Okay, okay. May you talk about how Americans speak on a regular beat and ways to practice? This is a really good question, and I know we've talked about, you have great questions about stress and intonation. Okay, so may we talk about how Americans speak on a regular beat? So something I want to talk about here is that a lot of times, we get confused about what we're talking about. And actually, I do have this ready. So we use a lot of words interchangeably. And so a couple of different things. So one thing is stress. When we're talking about stress, there's actually two things. There's word stress, which is which syllable in a word is stressed. And then there's sentence stress, which is which syllables of which words are stressed in a sentence. So word stress really helps you with pronunciation, with pronouncing a word accurately. For example, especially if you have longer words, well, it's important for all words, it's important for one syllable words. But if you want to pronounce a word accurately, you want to identify which syllable receives the most stress, and you want to make that longer, louder, and higher in pitch. If you don't do this, you're not going to sound natural, no matter how well you pronounce the word with the right sounds. It's because the vowel sound in that word needs to be longer, louder, and higher in pitch, and extremely clear, which means your mouth needs to really be moving into that particular shape. Watch my video on how to sound more American with 3 simple changes. It's like sound more American, 3 simple changes for an American accent, something like that. It's one of my more recent videos, and I really explain the vowel sounds there. What causes English rhythm is sentence stress. So the rhythm is the beats, what like Om was saying, the beats of the language. So English rhythm comes from making sure that one syllable in the key words of your sentence is stressed. And what happens is there's basically a regular beat between those stressed syllables. So I want to go I'm going to go to the gym after school, right? So there's kind of a regular beat, and I often use a rubber band. You can use a hair tie or something like that in order to kind of practice using that rhythm. So what's causing the rhythm is the lengthened syllable, the length in the syllable, the holding the vowel sound a little bit longer. Because it's kind of like, stressed and then reduced, stressed and then reduced, stressed and then reduced. And if you have words that are stressed, words that are reduced, they're going to create a natural rhythm through the beat, through the lengthened syllable and shortened syllable, lengthened syllable and shortened syllable. And it's important to think of this in terms of contrast. The difference between the two is what's creating English rhythm. And it's not but the thing about stress, like I said, it's longer, louder, and higher in pitch. All of these things are important. All of these things go together. And so it's not just one thing, but the lengthened syllable is what's creating the beats. So you let me know if that helped clarify that. Another common question I get that I will answer in a future video when I have the chance to record them is, what's the difference between intonation, tone, melody, and that kind of thing? So melody is like the music of English. So stress can also create that with our pitch rises and our pitch falls. The steps up, the glides down, or the glides up and the steps down, depending on how it works. So we do change our pitch in English, and we use our pitch to communicate meaning through emphasis, through stressing one word more than the other, through what we call focus words. There's lots of different language for it. Intonation includes that music of English, the natural rise and fall from sentence stress, because that's key to communicating your meaning clearly. Sentence stress is about emphasizing which words are most important. But intonation also communicates other types of meaning. It communicates how you feel. It communicates whether you're asking a question or whether you're asking someone to repeat themselves, whether you're not sure what they said, or if you're making a statement. It shows authority, it shows certainty or uncertainty. It shows a lot of different things. So that's what we mean by intonation. And intonation is more of a academic term, even though we use it a lot. I use that term in my videos. And so native speakers, but average people, normal people, will often call this your tone of voice, which gets shortened to tone. But for those of you who speak Asian languages in particular, English is not a tonal language. It does not matter how you enter a particular syllable. When we talk about our tone of voice, we're talking about whether we sound happy or sad, whether we sound annoyed or excited, that kind of information that we communicate through our intonation. But most people will say your tone of voice, like kids get told, I don't like your tone of voice by their parents. So that's a common question that people ask about intonation, stress, and melody. But they're all just synonyms. And a lot of times the reason we use the different words is that not everybody knows the term stress or they know the term intonation. So we use rhythm and melody, music, things like that to try to help you find the information that can help you. Okay, so let me know if that helps you. What's the main nationality among my students? Oh, let me show you where I am in this. What's the main nationality among your students, and what's their main difficulty speaking English in terms of accent? The main nationality, there isn't one. I would say I work with a lot of people from Korea, a lot of people from China, Russia, Japan. Surprisingly haven't worked with a lot of Spanish speakers, but people from all over. There's no one nationality, but I would say the main difficulty for almost everybody is stress, using stress correctly and consistently, and really lengthening the syllable, because like I said, that communicates a lot of meaning. It helps you pronounce a word correctly. It helps you be able to stress the words that are most important. I think that that's something I work on a lot. At the more advanced levels, what we often work on is the communication skills, is saying the right thing in the right way. That's kind of like what to say, how to say it, and why it matters. It's the cultural fluency. It's being able to say the right thing for the right situation in professional situations, being able to give difficult feedback to people in a way that sounds polite and not demanding. It's those more advanced nuances of the language, and that has to do with intonation. It's all connected. You can never learn one thing without the other. But I would say stress is the most important, and other things about accent a lot of times is thought groups, being able to pause in between ideas in the right place, take a breath, separate ideas correctly, slow down your speech if you're You know, a lot of times when people become fluent, they speak really, really fast with no pauses, and we use pauses for emphasis to help people understand what we're saying. Right? So you have to, that takes practice, it takes work, and it's an ongoing process of breaking ideas into thought groups. What I will say is not a struggle is connected speech and linking. And I think a lot of reason why people find connected speech and linking so stressful is that they're learning it too soon. If you don't have, I say this in my video on informal contractions, if you do not stress your words correctly, you're not going to sound natural while linking words. You have to get stress before linking. And stress also includes reductions. So I think people will often get stress right or get close, but then they won't reduce their words or they won't reduce the syllables. So I think stress is a big challenge, which is why I teach it so much. Okay. And Klaus says, good to see me again. Happy Women's Day. What do I recommend to get good pronunciation? I recommend, what do I recommend to get good pronunciation? I'm going to need to take a moment and think about that. Let me have a sip of water. I think having good pronunciation, the best way to start is to have good listening, to really be able to think about, to be able to listen to people speaking and identify which words are stressed the most, which syllables are reduced, how do words get linked together, is to be able to identify those features in speech. When I was taking a class to learn how to teach pronunciation many years ago, one of the things that we learned was listening to native speech and analyzing the features of their speech so we could also do it, because a lot of native speakers do things without thinking about it. So you have to kind of be able to identify the different aspects of the accent in order to be able to hear them and when people are speaking naturally, and then to be able to produce them. So it really does take training your ear, which is why I have that video on training your ear with some suggestions. So I think that that's really important. I also think a really key thing that we forget to talk about a lot of times is you have to be able to be aware of the pronunciation mistakes that speakers of your native language are making. And this is something you can do a Google search. There's lots of resources. They're mostly designed for teachers or linguists to learn what the common pronunciation mistakes are. But I can tell, you know, what an Arabic speaker will struggle with versus a Korean speaker versus a Spanish speaker versus a Russian speaker. There's all kinds of influences of our native language that affect our accent. And some of those might be really challenging to overcome, but others you'll be able to fix as long as you understand what they are. Like, it took me a really long time to understand this, and this sounds funny. I've been speaking Spanish for 20 something years, and I didn't realize that you don't stress words by lengthening them in Spanish. It's volume, it's not length. And so that was affecting my accent in Spanish because I was lengthening stressed syllables, just like I teach you to do in English. But it doesn't work in Spanish like that. It's different. Stress comes across differently. Emphasis is different. So you have to know what the common pronunciation mistakes are, the common accent challenges are for your native language, in order to really have good pronunciation and start fixing those. Like, you know, Americans, we don't roll our R's when we speak, and that's very common in languages like Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, other languages. So being able to fix those most common mistakes was really essential, knowing what they are and being aware of them, because you're going to have to catch yourself every single time you're doing it in order to fix it. So that's what I can think of right now. Let me know if that helped you. Okay. Happy to see you. Okay. Thank you, Nelson, for helping. David, nice to see you. Okay. Do I have to learn phrasal verbs? Ooh, where are we going? Do I have to learn phrasal verbs to sound more natural? That's such a good question. You know, it's kind of a big joke among teachers and among education professionals that everyone teaches phrasal verbs because everybody seems to want to learn phrasal verbs. And the truth is, you do need to use them, but I think you can learn them in context, learn them in the situations where you may be using the more Latin-based word because it's a translation from your language, and instead you want to use the phrasal verbs instead. I do think you need to use phrasal verbs to sound natural, just because we use them more than we use the more complicated words. I have a very old video on my channel that's was a live video, which is how to use clear, simple vocabulary to sound more professional. And one of the things I say is we use simple vocabulary in American English in particular. So if you use the more complex language, even if your meaning is clear, it may not sound natural because Americans would naturally lean towards the phrasal verbs. Many years ago when I was teaching, there was a whole book on phrasal verbs used in business context that are super common. People use sports idioms and things like that as well in the business context. So yeah, I do think it's important, but I wouldn't say just study phrasal verbs to sound more natural or to sound more like a native speaker. You want to learn them in context, learn them in the situations. So that's where your listening skills, I have a video that's on how to use your listening skills to improve your speaking. And I talk about tuning your ear to listen just for those phrasal verbs. And also, if you're interested in pronouncing phrasal verbs correctly, watch my video on how to pronounce phrasal verbs with word stress, because that's really key, important as well. Okay. Okay, thank you, Denise. I'm glad that you subscribed. Hello, Habib. Hello, Elvis. Thank you. Happy Women's Day. Okay, so Danilo says, I know what you're talking about. I take this phrase in a series. For sure, it's not a mistake. It's not. All of them's done bad things. Yeah, bad English. Yeah, incorrect grammar is common in everyday speech, usually in more casual speech. I've been discussing this ever since I started teaching it, but a lot of times the reductions and things like that, they become more enhanced when you're relaxed with friends and family. You're in a relaxed setting. In a professional setting, you may speak a little more clearly, and that's why it's important to understand. And Nelson says, speaking a natural pace makes sense. Please keep speaking like that. Thank you. I'm glad that helps. Okay, Little by Little says, I found a simple solution. Make the video or the audio faster, like here on YouTube. Yes! Woohoo! I'm giving you a thumbs up. Where's the thumbs up? And make it on 1.25 or even 1.5, and then listen to it again with a normal speed. You will be surprised. That is a really, really, really important thing to be able to understand. And that's my recommendation a lot of times. If you are having trouble understanding me or someone else because you think we speak quickly, you can slow down the video on YouTube. On desktop, it's the gear icon. You can adjust the speaking speed, and on your mobile, it's the 3 dots in the right hand corner. I personally, when I watch YouTube videos, I speed them up to 1.5 or 1.75, sometimes 2, because I think people speak really slowly, and we actually can understand faster than people can speak, so our ears can process a little more quickly. And it's good to challenge yourself. If you think someone speaks slowly, watch the video faster, and so that you can get it at the speed you like. If you think someone speaks quickly, slow it down. You're in charge. That's the great thing about online content. I mean, you can't adjust while I'm speaking, but you can go back and watch this and adjust it to your speed. Like, you're in charge. There's closed captioning. Closed captioning is encouraged on YouTube, which is the subtitles, the CC, the captions, in order to help you speak a little better. So do that for sure. Okay, Karita says, do you use apps analyzing and showing different phonetic aspects with graphics or images, sound analysis? Do I use it myself when working with people, or do I use it? I often look at that information, and sometimes like I'll in my own research of the topic. But I'm not a visual learner. I'm an audio learner, so I prefer listening. But yeah, you could definitely use, analyze sounds and things like that. That's just not my particular field of specialty. So, I think it can, if you have it depends on where you want to spend your energy. I think it can be helpful to see the rises and falls. I try to read when I can academic papers on intonation where they do, that kind of analysis, but it's not, mine's more of a practical interacting with people perspective. Like, how do people use it in everyday speech? Adriana, nice to see you. You love my ponytail. Thank you. Oh my gosh, I need a haircut. It's so long. Thank you. Good TV show. Yes. Oh, good TV show. Outlander. Yes, it's totally good. Okay. Separation into syllables is a subject nobody speaks about. Yeah. And, I was actually realizing not only just separation into syllables, but nobody talks about what is a syllable. I was researching yesterday to do things on my website, to add some information to my website about syllables. And I realized there's no good information about syllables. Just like, what is a syllable? Like, we all assume we understand what syllables are, but nobody talks about it in the English fields. It's mostly educating children how to read and that kind of thing. So yeah, syllables is important. Hello, Nismi. Can I explain chunking? Yes. Oh, Adriana, thank you. Yeah, I know. What am I at? Let's see what I'm at for subscribers. Oh my gosh. And it was so funny, guys, because I wanted to do this video last week. According to the projections of the video, I was supposed to hit 10,000 last week for so long, and then my subscribers like dropped. And last night I was like, okay, I'm gonna wake up and I'm gonna be at 10,000 and I'll have my live stream. And I had lost subscribers overnight, so I said, oh my goodness, close enough. I mean, it doesn't matter. It's just a number, but it's kind of, I mean, it does matter on YouTube. They give you things when you have different numbers of subscribers. So. Just a few things to think about. Sorry. Every time I try to look on different screens, it gets small. Okay. So yeah, it's just funny. Okay. Can I explain chunking? Yeah. So chunking and thought groups is a topic I talk about in my courses because it's not complex, but it's not simple. Like it's hard to explain, in a way that's good for the general public in a simple way. But basically, think about when you're writing and you're putting, how do I explain this? I used to call this phrasing. In some of my earliest videos, I call this phrasing because that's what it's called in writing. But chunking is separating your words into digestible chunks, like smaller pieces. Let me stop showing the screen. So chunking is the same as thought groups. So thought groups are the ideas that go together. And a thought group can be between 2 to 7 words, right? And I'm just throwing out a number. I've heard 2 to 5, 2 to 3. It can be 1 word long in some case, but just to give a general idea, 2 to 7 words. So thought groups are ideas that go together. So if we say like I've been learning Spanish for 20 years. I've been learning Spanish for 20 years. There's basically 2 chunks there, right? I've been learning. I don't want to separate it there. It's hard to do live. This is why I pre-plan a lot of my videos. I've been learning Spanish for 20 years. What a native speaker will do, we won't say, I've been learning Spanish for 20 years. That doesn't even sound natural when I say it. It sounds really fast and hard to understand. I've been learning Spanish for 20 years. So in that particular sentence, there's two chunks. I'm using 2 chunks here. I've been learning Spanish for 20 years. Native speakers will naturally kind of hold their pitch up high. That's the intonation. That's the holding intonation, as I call it. What is it called in linguistics term? Fall, rise, fall. No. Anyway, I've been learning Spanish for 20 years, and you kind of hold your intonation there to signal that you're not done talking for 20 years, and then you finish the thought. There's a slight pause. Some people will breathe. Some people will just pause. Some people will change their tone. Some people will do all of those things together. I've been learning Spanish for 20 years. I've been teaching English for 10 years, right? So all of these different things help your listener understand what you're saying. And the important thing to understand about English that varies between languages is that in English, it is the responsibility of the speaker, there's a thought group, to deliver the message in a way that the listener can understand, right? So what we do in order to help people understand us is we naturally chunk our words into smaller phrases. And the thing that's important to understand is that part of this you'll do naturally by understanding how the language works. Like I've been learning Spanish. I've been learning needs to stay together because that's all that verb phrase. I've been learning Spanish will normally stay together because Spanish is the object of that particular phrase. I'm not going to diagram sentences today, but I've been learning Spanish for 20 years. For 20 years is going to stay together because that's the clause, the prepositional clause, right? I've been learning Spanish for 20 years. I've been teaching English for 10 years. Stress and intonation are the most important aspects of accent reduction, right? So I'm exaggerating the thought groups in order to help you understand what they are. But breaking your ideas into these thought groups helps your listener focus on what's most important. In natural speech, not in teacher speech, we're going to stress one word of each thought group more than the other. So I've been learning Spanish. Technically, there's a lot of content words in that particular phrase. I've been learning Spanish, but you can hear that Spanish receives the biggest, strongest stress in that phrase. I've been learning Spanish for 20 years. Years receives the most stress. So Spanish years, I mean, that would just be reducing it. But basically, the idea is that reduced words, if you didn't say them, you would still understand the meaning. Learning Spanish, 20 years. You understand the meaning of the sentence. And then the focus words in the thought group, the ones that receive the most stress, are going to really, really, really help you understand what's the most important idea in the sentence. I've been learning Spanish for 20 years. The time and the language are more important than all the other words in the sentence. So that's kind of how, I don't know if that's a concise summary of thought groups in chunking, but learning how to do that takes work. It takes practice. It takes kind of an understanding of how people present ideas. And that's why if you're at the stage where you are trying to develop stronger use of chunking and thought groups, phrasing, that kind of thing, pausing for effect, that's when it is helpful to listen to TED Talks, listen to speeches, because they will pause for emphasis. I like suggesting Oprah Winfrey, those of you who know who she is, because she's so emphatic. Do people speak that emphatically in natural speech? Some people do, some people don't. But listening to someone who's emphatic, it's a little more exaggerated. It's more emphasis, more passion in their statements that can help you get a sense of how you can use your words for effect. So I'll check back in with the chat box and we'll see what you're saying there. Okay. All right. So let's see. So let me know if that helped little by little. Okay. Yes. Thank you. Nuance, a subtle difference or shade of meaning. Yes. Nuance is my favorite stuff. It's my favorite stuff to teach. Okay. How can I learn the stress of words? I mean, ideally, you'll be able to pick it up by listening to the word, but you can use the dictionary. Someone recommended an app where they just emphasize the stress. They don't use the International Phonetic Alphabet. You can learn stress patterns, which is what I teach. For example, we can watch my video on phrasal verbs. I'm teaching a stress pattern for phrasal verbs so that there are some patterns that you can practice and understand. But you have to either tune your ear to it or you have to be willing to look it up in order to understand it. That's such a good question. All right, is accent reduction a positive or negative term? Who invented it? I have no idea who invented it. Okay, hold on. I need to have a drink of water. When you talk this much, it gets quite exhausting. Okay. So, is accent reduction a negative term? Such a good point. I actually, and I will be quite honest with you guys because why not? But I struggle with teaching this particular field because I don't want to make you feel like there's something wrong with not sounding like a native speaker or having a non-native accent, because I don't think there's anything wrong with it. So can it be a negative term? Well, it really, there's a lot of debate about this because actors, like for example, British actors especially who learn an American accent, they often refer to it, instead of accent reduction, they say accent addition, because you're actually adding to your natural accent and you're adding different features to give yourself an American accent, for example. Other people will call it accent modification. So you're modifying your accent in order to improve how you sound. It's also called accent elimination, completely getting rid of your accent in order to improve how you sound. And, but accent elimination, it can sound negative because it sounds like you're trying to wipe out part of your identity. So a big struggle for me in the type of message I try to deliver on this channel is how can I be positive and encourage you to sound better without making you feel like there's something wrong with how you sound? Because I don't feel that way about speaking Spanish with a non-native accent. And that's something I want to make a video about. It's not really about, the reason I say accent reduction a lot is that's what people are looking for. That's what people understand. Reduce your accent, improve your accent. But I try to use the positive message, improve your accent. But a lot of times people aren't motivated to change unless they feel negatively. So it's kind of like a mindset thing. But it's not a negative term. I have no idea who invented it. You could probably do a Google search. But it really, and people change what they think about it, and that's why initially, since we're here and we're talking about the beginning of my channel, initially when I started my channel, or I started my website back in 2014, I said sound more natural. And it was because a lot of times the questions I would receive in the classroom when I was teaching in the classroom were questions about why can't I say blah, 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 right? Why can't I say this? And the answer is because it doesn't sound natural. It sounds, the word I would use instead is awkward, which is just like another way to say off or odd or strange. So it just sounds off. So it's kind of like the question about phrasal verbs. Can you get by without using a phrasal verb? Sure. Like, you can totally communicate without phrasal verbs, but it won't sound natural. It will just sound like someone who's a non-native speaker who's expressing their meaning in a different way, which is totally fine. But my whole thing with sound more natural, that started from like, how can you use this particular thing a little bit more like a native speaker would use it? It's not to like eliminate who you are, to completely change who you are, but it was to help you sound just a little bit more like a native speaker so that you can get into those deeper conversations, so that people understand you are culturally competent, that you're able to have this conversation with them and they're not distracted by your accent. Because that was my thing about learning Spanish and learning the regionalisms of the Argentine accent or the Peruvian accent or the Chilean accent, the 3 countries I've spent quite a lot of time in, is I wanted to sound more like them, not because I never sounded like an Argentine. I never perfected an Argentine accent. But I used phrases that they would use that sounded natural. So people would be like, oh, she understands my culture. Let's talk to her on a high level. Let's talk to her and have an intelligent conversation instead of treating me kind of like someone who didn't speak Spanish at all, which still happens, even though I understand everything they say. So that's what sounding more natural is for me. It's just trying to get closer to how a native speaker would say it, so that the idea of whether or not you understand is never a question. So I don't know. That's kind of a random thought about that. Okay. Okay, so Maricela says, I think an important part of learning English to understand our body and how it works. Yes, for example, how we do glottal pauses, because it's something common in English but not in other languages. Such an intelligent comment, Maricela. Yes, it's so true. And something I've been working on and that I plan to talk about on this channel is voice placement. Like, where does your voice come from? Like, where does your sound resonate from? Like, where are you projecting the sound in your mouth? Glottal stops. Somebody asked me, oh, are glottal stops important in English? And I said, well, sometimes I use them, sometimes I don't. I say mountain sometimes, and then sometimes I say mountain, curtain. No, I don't say curtain. I say curtain. There are sometimes that, as someone from New England, as I mentioned at the beginning, I will use a glottal stop, and then there are other times I won't. Like, I don't usually say entertainment. I say entertainment, usually, but sometimes I'll say it the other way. So it's true. Understanding how our body works, how our mouth works, like having more control over this, like as somebody from the Boston area, like I don't open my mouth as much as someone from Texas does in order to pronounce sounds. I remember when I lived in Argentina, the people who had better accents in Spanish were people who had grown up in California, Texas, the South, because just the way people move their mouths. And it was actually a Colombian speaker of Spanish who said, well, where are you from? And I said, oh, the Boston area. He's like, well, that's why you have such a strong accent in Spanish. You guys don't open your mouths. So even me, when I try to explain vowel sounds, I exaggerate and it hurts. My mouth feels tired. So you have to get better control over your body. Just a really smart thing. Yambazas Amin says contractions and linking words are really useful. Yeah, contractions are important. Contractions was one of my top tips. That was one of the first things I ever published on my website, and I recently put a new video about it, a more updated video, because I find it very funny when people will use informal contractions like wanna and gonna, but they don't use don't or won't or, can't. They use like cannot or something like that. The standard contractions are essential. Informal contractions are something you can develop later. That's just my philosophy. Okay, Igor says, there are so many great teachers online from the US, the UK, Australia, Canada. Everyone has a different accent. How to combine it? Should I choose only one type of English and follow it? Well, it totally depends on your goal, right? It depends on what you want. Do you want to sound just like someone from a particular region? And everyone has, I hear there's a lot of people who are accent coaches who have a Midwestern accent, either a Midwestern Canadian accent or a Midwestern American accent. And that to me is not the accent that I would desire, but it's like, the differences are extremely subtle, but I can hear them because I'm a native speaker, So it's like, you have to kind of think about, like, I used to say this to my clients. I used to say, who do you want to sound like? And we would listen to clips of a particular celebrity or someone who is well known. Who do you want to sound like? What would you like to get closer to? A lot of times I use former President Obama as an example of a way to really use pauses and thought groups in order to be clear. But you don't necessarily want to speak like him. Like that's a very particular speaking style. So you have to kind of identify who do you want to sound like and then get closer to that. Personally, if I were to study Spanish online, or if I were to study Portuguese online, I would only focus on the accent I wanted. There's a big difference. I would listen for general American, but there's like regional Portuguese accents that are only spoken in a specific region. Just like I learned Spanish from Argentina, but that's not the accent I want. I would rather have an accent more from Peru or Ecuador or Bolivia that's a more neutral sounding accent. I used to live in Chile. Like I did not try to have a Chilean accent because those are very, very, very regional accents that have a lot of social markers and that kind of thing. Like, so, some people choose to learn a Mexican accent because I'm speaking in Spanish, because they want to they interact mostly with people from Mexico, or they want accents from Puerto Rico or Cuba or something. It just depends on what your goal is. So if your goal is to sound like someone from a particular area, then you should choose one. But I do think that listening to accents from everywhere can be helpful if you interact with people from everywhere. But if you have a target accent, it can be quite helpful for a time to only listen to that particular accent. Like listen for a general American accent, or listen for a more neutral UK accent or an Australian accent. But if you're just trying to learn in order to speak more clearly, word stress is something that is fairly consistent across all of them. It just depends on what your goal is. Hope that answers your question. Okay, Gabrielle says, what's the difference between get and obtain? I would have to do context on that one. I don't think I can answer that really in depth. I would encourage you to watch my 3 videos on vocabulary. There's a playlist called Improve Your Vocabulary Naturally, and I think the 3rd one will help you figure that out for yourself, because me trying to explain the difference is not going to be as helpful as you figuring it out by looking at the words, language, and context. That's really what I teach. That's what I do to figure out the right word to use when I write in Spanish. So just something... there's situations that you would use each of those words, but I would say that get is more natural and obtain is more official. It would be more, academic, more legal, that kind of thing, more professional in situations. Like I need to obtain a document for my immigration paperwork. They would say something like that, but you say, I wouldn't say I need to obtain some milk for my coffee. So it's just important to understand context. Hello, Loot Llama Squad Productions. Hello, Rommel Ron. Is it hard being an adult? Yes, it is. Okay, so Miriam says, hi, Teacher Kim. Accent acquisition. Yeah, people will say that. I said accent addition, like to add addition, but acquisition as well. Daniela says, can you explain the meaning of headspace? I'm struggling with that. It's the space between one surface, the top of the figurative one I didn't get. Is it insight? I'm not really sure. What's the context that you've heard Headspace in? Because Headspace is the name of a meditation app, so that's why I'm getting a little confused. Headspace, a lot of times, yeah, I would need context to explain that. I'm sorry, I can't really come up with an answer. And thank you. I'm glad it was helpful. Okay, because you guys have to let me know if the information I share answers your question. It's hard to answer things on the fly, as we say, but it's also fun. Okay, Rama, how often am I publishing new videos? My goal is to publish a video a week, but clearly that doesn't always happen. I really wish I had spaced out the last group of videos every 2 weeks, but I publish them when I can. The thing that is important to understand is videos take a lot of time. I would say it takes me at least an hour per minute of video. So if I have a 10-minute video, it's taken me at least 10 hours to make that video. If I have a 15-minute video, it's probably taking me 15 hours to make the video. And it's just, it takes time. It takes a lot of time because it's important to me that they're good videos. My plan this year is to redo some of the videos where I didn't give a lot of examples, or it was a live video and I just didn't feel like it was super clear, because I'm not always super clear when I speak. Not everybody is, super articulate every single moment. Like, I've been talking for an hour now and I'm tired, and you can hear that in the way I explain things. So yes. And Karita says a bad accent can be tiring for the audience, even if the expression is good. Yeah, that is really true. That's the problem with an accent. You know what it actually is? It's not even about the accent, but I recently made a course that you can find on my website called Intonation Clinic. That's a really, really, really in-depth course on intonation. Like, all the information about intonation I could possibly include, while also making it easy to complete and making it as condensed and effective as possible. But one of the things I found when researching that, when I was researching a little more about thought groups and like reading the research about how people respond, is that what happens with thought groups, especially when you do not break your ideas into smaller, more manageable chunks, as I often say, it is hard for your listener to keep listening for you. And that's why non-native speakers who speak fluently and quickly, but don't pause between ideas, the listener is like constantly like, when are they going to give me a chance to think? When are they going to give me a chance to think? They're like waiting for that little pause, that breath, in order to digest the idea. And so that's where thought groups can really help your audience not get exhausted. And yeah, normal speech, I mean, it's different in a live video because no one is interacting with me, so I have to keep talking. But in a conversation, you want to allow some space to breathe, some space to think and consider. It can also be really exhausting in a conversation when you're talking with someone who always has something to say and doesn't give you a chance to talk. It's important to give the conversation a little space to breathe. But yeah, a bad accent can be tiring. And also, speaking any language can be tiring. It can be tiring for you guys. And that's something people always ask me. They say, I'm so exhausted speaking English. English is exhausting. It is never easy to speak a language at length, even if you're fluent. You will get to a point in your day where you have spoken all the English you can possibly speak and you were tired and you need a break. You will get to a point. And some days my Spanish does not come out correctly. Nothing I do, it sounds right. And unfortunately, sometimes those are the days when I have to have professional interactions in Spanish and people are judging me based on how I sound. So you have to, like, in order to really, like I said earlier, in order to really, to really like continue on this journey and to have success, you need to give yourself a break, which means you need to give yourself some grace. You need to give yourself some patience. You need to be kind to yourself and understand that you're not always going to be on. We're never on 100% of the time. There are times when I've done live videos, when I was doing weekly live videos, and I couldn't speak some weeks. There are just times when, as a teacher, I'm tired, or I don't feel good, or my mood is off. So you have to understand, with language speaking, you're going to have a day when your accent sounds terrible. And then you're going to have a day where your accent sounds amazing. And people are like, wow, how did you learn to speak like that? And you just have to be able to accept the bad situation and then keep, like I said in my last video, trust the process and keep going. Just know that is just nothing you experience as a language learner is the end. It is not the last chance you will have to speak the language. It is not the last chance you will have a good accent. It is not, you made one mistake and it is over. If that is ever the case with somebody, they're not a person worth interacting with. Like, that's why I hate those tests and things like that, where they test you and they judge you. It's like, you're in an awkward situation recording your voice into a microphone. Like, you're not going to sound perfect 100% of the time. And, I hope that the evaluators know that. Okay. Thank you, Adriana. Do I teach full time? You're such a great specialist. I'm trying to teach full time as best as possible, but I'm trying. It's hard to teach full time too, because teaching is quite exhausting. But that's the goal. Hello, Antonio. Yeah, I know this is kind of a weird time for me, but this is the time I was able to schedule a live stream. Okay, could I please explain how Americans pronounce foreign names, especially word stress? That is a really good question. So, for example, your name, Gambasa Amin, I have no idea how to say your name. So if I were meeting you in person, I would ask you how to say your name. But I think that, first of all, the way I would pronounce names, I tend to Spanishify any foreign name that I don't know, even though I know that I believe you're a native Arabic speaker. Can I explain it easily? No, but I would say that a lot of times people try to stress the second syllable. So let me think if I can think of Miriam, no, that's first at the beginning. Miriam, Danilo. It depends on the name. There's a lot of rules that are unconscious for how I'm trying to think, just looking at the names. But the thing is that we do try to find the stress based on the word, like based on how it looks, like Antonio. Like a lot of times it is the second syllable. So if Adriana or in American English, it would be Adriana. It wouldn't be Adriana. It would be Adriana, Adriana. So it'd be stressed on the first syllable. So that's where it's important to, it's hard. Like I've learned names I struggle with a lot of Turkish names. I had a student, I think her name was Gökçen. I still struggle with that. And I feel terrible because it hurts when somebody mispronounces your name. But it's helpful if you are interacting with a lot of native English speakers and you want to help them pronounce your name correctly. You kind of need to identify which syllable you want them to emphasize, and that's going to be the syllable that is longest, loudest, and highest in pitch. Which one are you going to make the most emphasized, and try to make sure you pronounce that syllable clearly, because native speakers will naturally be looking for one particular syllable to emphasize the most, and then we're going to reverse construct the rest of the name from there. So, yeah. I like your advice little by little. And little by little, my advice to everyone here, stop studying English and start using it. Totally. Something I would add to that I agree with is I have a series of videos, a playlist on the channel, which is become an English speaker, not an English learner. Is there anything wrong with being an English learner? Of course not. But what happens is that when you see yourself as an English learner or an English student, there's something very powerful about the language you choose to use to describe yourself, but the way you see yourself. An English learner is someone who's not there yet, right? It's someone who still has more to go, who's not at the right level, and that's where, you say, I'm a beginning student. Well, I don't even know what that means. Like, I have a video which is how to talk about your English level, where I basically am trying to explain that I would not talk to a non-native speaker and be like, are you a beginner? No one's ever going to ask you, are you a beginner, intermediate, advanced? No one's ever going to ask you to label yourself in academic terms in your normal interactions in real life. People are just going to judge based on your interaction with them. Like, how are you conversing? How complex are your sentences? Are you speaking clearly? Are you emphasizing the right words? Are you connecting ideas using good transitions, expressions, the conversation skills I used to teach all the time on this channel? If you go back to the earliest videos on my channel, they're listening for that information in order to determine for themselves what your level is. So, of course, there's nothing wrong with being an English learner. But when people sometimes will comment, Kim, slow down. We're English learners. And it's like, no, you're English speakers. You are speaking another language that is not your first language. You should be celebrating the fact that you've achieved any level of English. Do you know how many native English speakers don't speak another language? Like, I don't like to be super critical of the American culture, but most Americans don't speak another language to fluency. They don't even speak it conversationally. They speak it when they go to, Mexico to to have a beach vacation, they'll try to speak some Spanish. And I'm making a huge generalization, but you should be extremely proud of yourself for speaking English, for speaking a language and communicating with people, having a conversation with me in the chat, communicating with strangers on the internet. I mean, I like I said, I watch a lot of YouTube videos in other areas. I don't watch English videos, but I watch in other areas. And a lot of the people commenting on the yoga videos I watch are non-native speakers. How amazing are you for speaking a language that isn't your first, for trying to learn another culture, for not only learning the language in order to do whatever you need to do, get into school or get a job, but to communicate, to understand somebody else's culture, to understand this perspective of someone else. Like, that is amazing. Like, that is what I love about this industry, about this field, about teaching, about having a YouTube channel. Like, I'm so impressed by all of you for being English speakers, for being non-native speakers who have learned a language that is not your first. That is amazing. You should feel exceptionally proud of yourselves. And if you can always remember that is amazing. Like, I get emotional about it because it's amazing. It's something that I don't know a lot. I mean, well, okay, I work in an industry where I do know people who speak another language, but people who do not work in a language industry or the international education industry or international nonprofits don't often speak another language. You know, I grew up in an area where most people don't speak a second language. They have no idea how hard it is to learn another language. And you should feel really proud. You should feel proud. And that's why I say become an English speaker, not a learner. There's nothing wrong with learning a language. It's that you're a speaker. You have to own it. You have to feel proud. You have to be confident in the fact that you speak another language. And so that's basically my philosophy on that. Be proud of yourself. Be confident in the fact that you are communicating. It doesn't matter if you communicate perfectly. The fact is you are communicating. You are finding a way to express yourself. You were doing the best you can, and you were going to trust the process and keep going. So a little philosophy for you today. Okay, so let's go back to a couple more questions and then we'll end for today because it's getting quite long. Okay, doing exercises and it is the best way to be an English learner forever. Yeah, it's true. And it's funny because, you know, when I first started teaching, you know, right now I have a couple of courses. I have a course on stress and another course on intonation. And in the past I've had other courses. But when I started teaching, what I was actually doing, one-to-one coaching, one-to-one classes. And what we were actually doing is having conversations. And it's funny because a lot of people underestimate how hard it is to have a conversation in a language that's not your first, like to have an in-depth, lengthy conversation. So that was actually how I started. And that was when the conversation skills aspect of my YouTube channel back at the beginning, if you go back to the earliest videos, started is it's hard to say the right thing, to keep the conversations going, to ask the right questions, to transition into different topics, to bring up your idea, to show that you're listening. One of my favorite videos on my channel is the one about active listening. And people underestimate how hard it is to have a conversation. A lot of times people think it's just, you know, talking, and it's not. It's having a conversation, is connecting with other people. So at the end of the day, all of my resources on accent are really about communicating. It's not, that's why I don't focus on the pronunciation of sounds or the pronunciation of words, like how to pronounce schedule or something like that. It's that you're trying to communicate, you're trying to emphasize your points, you're trying to make sure that the person follows what you're saying, you're trying to make it easy for them to listen to you so that they can keep the conversation going. And kind of like somebody mentioned a moment ago, you're trying not to exhaust your listener. You're trying to help them have a conversation with you so you can benefit as well. And so, yeah, a lot of times when we talk about exercises and practice and homework and all that kind of thing, you're getting distracted with the details when you have to think about the application. Where are you going to use this information? What is a situation where this information matters? And if you go back to the beginning of my video, what I often try to say is, you know, what to say, how to say it, and why it matters. I want to give you that cultural understanding, like, why does this matter? When should you use this? When is this appropriate? That requires sensitivity in a way, and interacting in the language. Even if you don't have native speakers to talk to, you know, it requires listening to podcasts or studying interviews or listening to live videos and listening to how people talk and thinking about why. I always say, ask yourself why. That's how you start using the language. You don't have to speak the language to use it. Do you get what I'm saying? Okay, so let's see here. All right. Oops. Okay, so I don't know what is going on. Okay, so the one and only place you find the truth and only. Okay, I don't know what this is. All right. Oh my goodness. Okay, so can I suppose that if I can understand the whole video, I'm kind of fluent? Yes, and actually, and that's something I want to talk about. I want to talk about fluency in a future video, because the thing about fluency is, like, I think most people think of fluency as spoken fluency, and so you think about it in terms of, like, do you understand what, you know, like, or can I speak without translating? Can I, you know, think in the language? That's what fluency is. But fluency is also auditory fluency, you know, and that it sometimes develops first. When I was learning Spanish, I could understand before I could speak well. I could read before I could speak well. I could write in Spanish before I could speak well. So all of those aspects of fluency do help you. So yes, you were kind of fluent. And you know what? I remember from when I was learning Portuguese, the teacher said, okay, if you guys are, you know, it was after a year of studying together, and she said, what you need to keep strong is your listening skills. Your speaking skills will probably disappear, but they will be the first to come back. So the speaking skills will wax and wane is the word that came. They'll come and they'll go. They'll ebb and they'll flow, your speaking skills. But your listening skills, well, if you can keep those remaining strong, you'll be able to navigate the language. Fluency, I feel, and this is my experience, spoken fluency comes when you need it to. So obviously when you're interacting because you're living it or traveling in the language, you're going to speak more fluently. But it will come, you know, like say you have a week of conferences, you know, and presentations, you'll be able to speak more just because it'll be activated. That language will be activated. The goal of finding regular opportunities to speak is just keeping that language fresh in your mind and keeping it going. Okay. So yes. So yeah. Oh, and even then you said, even though I still make some mistakes, can someone, oh my goodness, that's a good question. I'm sorry. I feel bad having to hide people, but that's how it goes. Even though I still make some mistakes, can someone be fluent making mistakes? I feel like if you don't make mistakes, you can't be fluent. Like nobody speaks perfectly. No one's a robot. No one's, you know, and native speakers make mistakes. If you were to analyze my speech, I've made a ton of mistakes. I make mistakes in my videos all the time. I laugh because one of my intonation videos, one of the earliest, it was actually a live stream that I did on Facebook, and I looked at the transcript of it, and there's like this one phrase where I said, so as I was saying, I mean, and I said like a whole string of that in that entire video, and for many years that was the most popular video on my YouTube channel. Like, you know, it's like, oh my gosh, like there's some videos where it's just like I make a lot of mistakes or there's something wrong. And that's where, you know, you don't need to have unrealistic expectations of yourself. Making mistakes is good. I made a couple of videos on making mistakes. One is how to recover and keep going after making mistakes, so you have the right language to transition if you make a mistake. The other one is confidence when speaking, like how to feel more confident when speaking English. And it's basically like you'll feel more confident by using the language, not by thinking about using the language or practicing to use the language, by actually using it. And then the other one is the trust the process and keep going. Like you need to keep going. You need to make the mistakes. The only way you learn is by making mistakes. And when you make mistakes, you can come out on the other side and then you learn from those mistakes. And if you're making mistakes, that means you're trying something new. If you're making mistakes with stress, it's because you're trying to improve your stress. You're thinking about it. The mistakes that are problematic for people are the ones that are unconscious, that you don't think about. But think about mistakes when you're trying to use something that you just learned and put it into practice. Those are good mistakes. So that's important to keep in mind. All right, so let's finish up. Okay, Eder, thank you. Your channel's just amazing. It's helping me so much in my pronunciation skills. I appreciate that. Okay, good. Little by little, thank you. And Maricela feels good too. Okay, good. All right, guys. So this was yet again a lengthy live stream. I'm starting to get dark in here. So let's call it a day. So thank you guys so much for the interesting questions during this live stream, for being a member of this channel. Let's see, did we make it to 10,000? No. Okay. Okay, we're still short. Oh my goodness. I was hoping that would be hilarious if we were during the live stream, we were able to make it to 10,000 subscribers, but it's fine, whatever. I will say that, guys, that the best way if you want to support, free education on YouTube and free content, I don't know if you guys are familiar with, if you practice yoga, but there's a yoga YouTuber called Yoga with Adrienne who has millions of subscribers, but she always says the best way to support this channel is to like, comment, and subscribe, because it really does tell people that this content matters to you, that it helps you. You guys ask great questions and those help inspire future videos, and I look at the analytics for my channel, and more than 50% of the people who watch the videos are not subscribed. And it really does help, because it helps tell other people, hey, these videos are worth watching. So those of you who are subscribed and who do give me the thumbs up, I really do appreciate it, because it does make a difference. It enables me to keep making these videos. So so I will hopefully be back to my regular posting starting next week or the week after. I'm going to record videos next week. So hopefully we'll have some more videos. I have so many ideas. I have so much. It's kind of like you guys. There's so much I want to do that it's overwhelming, and there's just so many topics, and as you know, I focus on accent and communication skills, because those are my passions. That's where I feel passionate about. If you do like my explanations about grammar, I encourage you to go to my website, englishwithkim.com. When I first started my website, I used to do a podcast on grammar. So if you have grammar questions, I maybe answer them. You have to just look on my website for the articles by topic, and they're the oldest ones on my website. So it's not that I don't know how to talk about it. It's that I choose to focus on accent and communication, because I just find that that's something I can specialize in and really help you guys with. Otherwise, there's so much you could learn about English. So I hope this has been motivational for you. Thank you, Adriana. Thank you, Clau. And so thank you guys so much for joining this live stream. Those of you who are watching live, this may go unlisted, and we'll see. Live streams are kind of embarrassing and awkward at times. So you will be able to find this by going into your YouTube history. If you can't find this immediately on my channel, that's where it is. But it will probably be public for a week or two until I get a new video up, and then it'll probably go unlisted. But you still will be able to find it. So that's it. So be sure to give this video a thumbs up if you found it helpful. If you're not subscribed, what are you waiting for? Come on, help me get to 10,000 subscribers. It says I'm at 9995. It would just be awesome. And I really do appreciate you guys being here, taking your time, asking your questions, inspiring me to keep going, keep moving forward. So thank you guys. And be sure, if you haven't already, be sure to check out my website. You can sign up for my email community, get emails from me. I'm focusing specifically on accent stuff in the email lately. So soundmorenatural.com is the best way to join that. And that's it. Okay. Thank you guys. Have a great Friday. Have a great weekend. And I will talk to you again soon. Goodbye.